In the 1920s, my grandfather, Louis Browse, made a series of boat trips on Lake Winnipegosis with his friend Scottie Morrison and others. This may have been an annual event. In this video, you will first hear about a trip up the west side of the lake and then another trip on the east side. It seems they were gone for at least a week at a time, experienced powerful winds, slept on the boat, and were keenly interested in nature. In the summer of 1924, Louis and Scottie made an adventurous boat trip on Lake Winnipegosis that could have been as much as 250 kilometers. The images show you what their route might have been. The account you hear appears to be written by Scottie, and the photos are by Browse. Scottie and Browse started out on this trip alone and ran the first day to Glory Harbor as before, stayed there overnight, and next day, Monday, we left to cross to the camping islands, but the wind rising, we returned to Devil's Island. The wind going down after dinner, we left for Duck Bay. Duck Bay was reached in a squall, and we stayed there overnight, taking a run up Duck River the next morning. We left Duck Bay after dinner and ran by way of Camping Island to Morris Island, where the dredge was working. We visited with the crew and camped up the channel between the island and Birch Island, leaving the next morning and continuing north past Maggie's and Staple Island to Fox Point, where it again blew so hard that we stayed there at Fox Island. We rounded the south point of the island at sunset, and we were soon asleep, as it had been a long day. In the morning, we found ourselves in a dandy bay, and Browse went ashore to take pictures. This is where he landed, and on the point in the distance is Jim Wright's old camp. At Fox Island, it blew a gale for 3 days, and we were surely in a dandy harbor. We left on Friday evening, deciding it was best to turn our way homewards. On account of the prevailing winds, we stayed overnight at Maggie's Island, going down to the dredge next day. It blew all day Saturday, so we weekended there, running through to Coleman Island on the Monday. Coleman Island, the largest island in South Bay, runs out into a long reef at the south end, and the north end almost lies close to Red Deer Point. It is almost an entire meadow at the south end with a fringe of trees running along the water's edge. But from Wright's Camp north is a dandy belt of timber. We had to spend a few days here on account of the winds, but spent the time visiting the various parts of the island. We started homeward on the Friday morning, bucking a stiff norwash wind, and lay up over that night on a little half-moon island. Continuing the next morning, we rounded the Red Deer Point and headed to Winnipegosis, sailing at Robinson's Point. This next account is of a trip up the east shore of the lake, and this time, Browse and Scottie are joined by a friend, Mike. It appears as if Louis Browse has written the account as well as having taken the photos. It seems as if this is not a complete account of this trip. Here you can see the overview of where they may have traveled. Note, it's 160 kilometers as the crow flies up to that north end of the lake. Also, it appears that some of the place names are different now than they were then. Approaching Smith's Reef, now probably Cormorant Island, the weather continuing fine, we went in and saw the reef crowded with pelicans and crow ducks. The pels took to the wing, but the crow ducks lined up like sentinels on the walls of a castle to guard their young. We landed in good water. Note nest and young in front. Landing on the rookery, we found nests and young in all stages of development. Some nests still with eggs, others with newly hatched young, others again with young almost able to leave, besides a large number of young that were evidently unable to fly but could swim. The reef was a litter of fish bones, and beside each nest was a pile of young, fresh-caught fish. You can see Scottie try to make friends with Archie. The west end of the reef shows, in a marked way, the power of the ice shove in the spring breakup with the huge boulders that are thrown up here. The sky looking like a change for bad weather. We started out for Long Point, probably called Den Bay Point now. We tried to get Scottie and Mike in the lower picture with 3 stages of development of the young, but cut off the nest with the eggs, unfortunately. But Scottie has a fledgling in one hand and grasps Archie by the neck with the other. We tied up to the old mill site of the Standard Lumber Company about 6:30 p.m. and the bad weather signs proved right as it started to pour rain about 8 just as we had finished our supper and got our bunks ready aboard and the tent up. The wind increased to gale, forcing us to change our mooring and tie up to the other side of the dock. We stayed here 2 days, pitching tent and roaming in the wonderful bush, taking long hikes along the old logging roads, and reveling generally in the spicy woods. We struck camp and finally started out to round Long Point. Rounding Long Point, we had dinner at another mill site, and after dinner cut across to the north shore by way of Amy's Island and tied up to still another mill site. The weather looked threatening again, so we stayed there overnight and started out early the next morning along the north shore. We crossed the big reef at Grassy Portage and had dinner at High Portage. We went up over the hill a bit along the old Portage Trail of 4 miles to Cedar Lake. There being no harbor there, we did not go all the way, but set off again, and skirting the shore, finally entered Mink Creek in a glorious sunset. The portages seem to have different names now, and Mink Creek appears to be called Swamp Creek. This is all that seems to exist of this account. But if your family seems to have further accounts of Lewis and Scottie's adventures, please contact me.